it has been perfectly organized so that you cannot see the slides. Therefore, it does not matter if I stand in the middle of the room, closer to you, and talk to you. Doesn't matter about the slides. However, I think I should put them on just in case somebody can see them. So I will turn them on, and then I'm going to talk to you very briefly about the project which has paid for me to come here. And you know it's an EU project you have to disseminate. So I will spend a couple of minutes disseminating about the project, and then I will talk. We've had 3 different viewpoints this morning, which I found extremely interesting. Mine will be different again. I am going to talk about learning itself and how the social media might or might not affect learning itself, which we haven't come to yet. And that's another big question mark. So let me just put the PowerPoint on, and then I'll come back. If I switch it on, will you be able to move it on?
Sure.
And I'll tell you when I'm ready.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Well, that's me. That's me. And I live in London. But a very kind German friend gave me a present yesterday. If you can't see it, it's a little green man. And they use it in Berlin at the traffic lights. And we use it in England at the traffic lights too. But now that I have this, I can say, as a certain other very famous person once said, Ich bin ein Berliner. Although not quite. So I work at London University at the Institute of Education, which is one of the colleges of London University. You might have heard of SOAS, or Imperial College, or London School of Economics, and so on. Well, Institute of Education is one of the colleges like that. And the EU project which I'm in is called iSimply, and it is about how you can use social media for marketing purposes, not for education. And we are going to prepare some free online courses in how to use social media for marketing. And if any of that interests you, you might want to take a note of this. As you know, all our slides are on this computer here, and my slides, you will see, have a lot of references in them. And if you are interested in a lot of references about learning, not about my project necessarily, then you should take a copy of the slide, because there are links directly to a lot of resources about learning on a later slide you will see. So where was I? Oh yes, the project. Now the second interesting thing which the iSimply project is going to do, but hasn't finished yet, so I can't tell you if it's going to work or not, is that our Greek partner is going to create a web crawler, which is unusual. Now, Google is a web crawler. It just means something that goes over the internet and finds things. But this web crawler is going to be specifically designed to find content which will be of value to teachers, to save the teachers the time of having to go and find this content themselves. And the web crawler is supposed to bring that content back and drop it into a template which will be of use to the teacher, and so on and so forth. Now, it's a lovely ideal. Terrific idea, and if it works, fine. I don't know. So let's move to the next slide, please. Let's press the down arrow.
I'm done. I'm doing that.
It doesn't work?
No, not, but I will find it.
No, no.
I just
No,
did.
this one.
Yes.
It worked?
Yes.
Here, these arrows.
Yes, hold on.
Okay, all right. We have to explain to men what to do with technology. I've got some notes here, but don't worry, I'm not going to read. It's just to make sure I don't go off track, which I'm likely to do. So, I think we first have to start with what's learning. What are we talking about? We're talking about social media, we're talking about learning. If we want to define learning, you probably know how to do a definition. You need a genus and a difference to make a definition. So in a genus, you have something general. So I would say this is my sort of provisional definition of learning so that we can then move on and think about it. It's a mental activity. You could call it intellectual, but it's also sometimes partly a physical activity because your brain works, so that's physical. And if you're learning skills, then your body works, so that's physical. So that's the genus. There's also a difference between learning and other things. And the difference in that case among the mental activities is that you might mentally just understand, or you might understand and remember. Now, some people use learning just for understanding, some people use learning to mean remembering, and some people use learning to mean both together. What you do depends on your context, and there's no right or wrong because we're not doing mathematics, we're doing social sciences, so we can do what we like. Now we need to ask what's social. Well, that's very simple. Social is just being with other people. That's at a very simple level, but of course there are many different ways of being with other people. So the way we are together now and the way we are together on social media are different, and it's very, very complex to discuss that. But what we want to know is what's the difference between learning through, by, with the help of social media, or what we might call traditional learning, ordinary learning. What's the difference? Well, obviously, real time, real space, real togetherness, this physical now, and virtual. Does it make a serious difference? Well, the first speaker this afternoon, morning afternoon, mentioned a researcher who has given a model of what social learning is, Bandura, you referred to. And we didn't know each other before, but we also both used Bandura, and maybe many of you have heard of him. But there is a reference on my slides if you want to. And obviously, if we want to look at that, let's look at this second slide. I'll get out of the way a bit in case you can't see it. And this is a rather detailed model. It looks detailed when you look at the slide, but in fact it's very superficial because for each line of it you could get very much more complicated. But this is a model of social learning. It was not created for social media. So I'm just going to go down the list and mention each one that is a factor or a feature in social learning, and we can just ask ourselves, would it work equally well on social media if you're learning through social media? So the first thing Bandura has of his 5 factors is that people learn very well through observation. Now, we all know that. Children observe and they mimic. We all do it even as adults, even if we're not aware of what we are doing. Well, to some extent, we can observe through the social media, depending which social media. If you call YouTube social media, then we can learn through YouTube. But usually people don't call that social media. People usually mean Facebook type of thing, or blogs and so on. Now there we are getting something from other people at second hand, or even at third hand, because if somebody writes something in Facebook and quotes somebody else, well then it's third hand knowledge. It's not direct observation and imitation. So that's already just one crucial sort of difference. Now, the next point which Bandura makes about normal social learning is that mental states are important because you have to have some kind of internal reinforcement to what you're doing. Like you feel proud of it, you feel satisfied, a sense of accomplishment, and so on. Can we get that through social media? Well, I would say yes, because in writing, a great deal of is still possible, especially with YouTube. So that factor, I think, is not ruled out. by social media. However, a very important third point that Bandura makes is that learning does not necessarily lead to change in behavior. And very often, when you are teaching somebody something, you want them to internalize this learning so that their behavior in some sense changes, so that through some new knowledge or through some new skills, they are influenced in some way. And Bandura's answer to this is that the teacher is really still important. And this is the one thing that people are overlooking when they go on about how wonderful the social media are. I don't think you should forget the role of the teacher, because as Bandura pointed out, the teacher models the learner, models the process of learning for the learner. That is the key role of the teacher, to guide. And not just to guide occasionally, accidentally on the side, but to structure the learning. And if the learning is properly structured, then the learners will pay attention, they are more likely to retain the learning, and they are guided by the teacher to practice what they have learned, whatever it is, in one way or another, intellectually or physically, for skills or whatever. And the teacher can also reinforce and thereby motivate the learning. So that is, in his view, social learning in a more formal sense. Now, that doesn't mean we are against occasional, frequent, informal learning or non-formal learning. Why not? It's a highly important factor of everyday life. And Google has created a miraculous way for us all to learn informally. I can't live without Google anymore. I don't know how I ever lived without Google, and other search engines. But for teaching something really, you just have to have guidance of one kind or another. It doesn't always have to be a teacher. Your parents, friends, lots of people guide you and help you. But in our education systems, the teacher's important. Fourth and fifth will be the last points from Bandura. Verbalization forms a very important part of social learning. If you verbalize, if you have to speak about what you are learning, then you are learning better. Have you held up the card for me yet?
No.
Not yet? Okay. And the fifth point is self-efficacy, Bandura calls it, which means that a learner will learn, all children learn, to monitor themselves. We saw in one of the plenaries, one of the speakers showed a picture of a child learning to ride a bicycle. And I also learned to ride a bicycle a couple of years ago in my old age. And I realized that you do this fifth thing, self-efficacy, which is self-monitoring. In other words, when you fall off the bicycle, you know damn well you haven't learned how to ride a bicycle. And this kind of self-monitoring is very important in learning. It's not just the teacher that will tell you whether you are right and wrong. In many situations, if the teacher has structured it properly, the learner will know whether they've got it right or wrong. And that's a very important thing. So the problem with social media, I think, is that we can do some of all the learning through social media, but not all. Because learning is not like maths. It's not either, 2 and 2 is 4, and there's nothing else. It's either 4 or it's not. But with with learning in general, it's not either you've learned it or you haven't. It's not like that. You might have learned it sort of a bit, and then with more practice you learn it sort of a bit more, and so on. It is on a scale of the degree to which you have learned something. It's not sort of full-time, full plus 2 and 2 equals 4. I should have said that what I've been doing all my life at the Institute of Education is studying learning. So that's why I feel so confident about being so emphatic about what I'm saying. Even so, you can disagree with me, it doesn't matter. So let's just move to the final slide.
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Can you move to the final slide? I want to show people what I've put on the final slide. These are some It looks a lot, but it's only some references to different studies of learning by different authors. Now that is a list which I left like that because it's clear to read, and there are 53 references there. If you go to the next slide, please. It's the same list, but you can't read it because the pale part that you can't see is a URL link. So that's why I suggested, if you're interested in these references, take the slides from that computer when you leave, and you will get these links to 53 references on learning. So I thought I'd give you some practical, something useful to take away. So my answer to the question, social learning is like any other kind of learning, isn't it? Is yes and no. Right. Thank you.